Hello, you're still there. It's good to see you. My name's James and I've travelled back in time to tell you about events that began long, long ago in Scotland in 1801. Now, I'll take my hat off and say hello once again. What's special is going to happen on Monday the 25th of January? I bet you know the answer. It's an easy question, easy peasy. It's Burns night. Maybe you'll be sitting down to find some haggis, neeps and tatties on your plates at tea time instead of a hamburger or chips. You can be sure all over Scotland, in fact all over the world, people will be putting a forkful of haggis into their mouths on the 25th and raising a glass of iron brew or maybe something a wee bit stronger and toasting the immortal memory of Rabbie Burns. You'll certainly remember 2021 because we've most likely not to be in school joining in the celebrations we normally have in January. If it wasn't for the COVID, where would we be? Oh, we'd be sitting at the table, having haggis for our tea. However, here's the story of how Burns suppers came about. And when you have a haggis on the 25th of January, you're part of a tradition that goes back over 200 years. In 1801, on the 5th anniversary of the death of Robert Burns, 9 men who knew him very, very well met for dinner in Burns Cottage in Alloway in Ayrshire to remember him. The master of ceremonies was a local minister. He was called the Reverend Mr. Paul, and he devised an evening with a fine fat haggis, recitations of Burns' poems, and the singing of Robert's famous works, and raised a toast to the memory of their very dear friend and hero. It was such a great evening, a success. All agreed that we'd meet again the following January for a birthday dinner for the bard, little knowing that they had invented something global that we know today as the Burns Supper. It still broadly follows the Reverend Minister's original plan. Burns' popularity grew rapidly after his untimely death at the age of 37, and the idea of meeting annually to share his poems and songs in the bonds of friendship and celebration fair caught the imagination of the public. Some Ayrshire merchants and businessmen in Greenock on the River Clyde followed with the first Burns Club supper in January 1802. Other West Coast towns like Paisley, Irvine, Kilmarnock, Dumfries, all with very strong links to Rabbie, reached out and joined in the new celebrations. Typically, a dozen or more men sat down to dine, sometimes in a bar that Rab had frequented when he was still alive. But the real link was his poetry with its message of love, freedom, and the essential values of humanity, being kind to others. Many of these suppers were organised by Burns clubs that are still alive today. A great boost in taking part came with the big Learned Burns suppers. The original of these was arranged by Sir Walter Scott. Now, that's his really big and towering monument in Edinburgh's Princes Street, if you've ever visited Scotland's capital. Now, that was back in 1815. With the help of another, but not so famous, but very well admired poet, a man called James Hogg, he was known as the Ettrick Shepherd from the Scottish borders. He gave the immortal memory at that first dinner that Scott arranged in Edinburgh. The first supper outside Scotland was at Oxford University in 1806, hosted by a few students from Glasgow, with London seeing its first bar day in the early 1820s. Wherever there were Scots merchants trading in the English county towns, festivals remembering Burns sprang up in these places over the next 20 years. The format was popular. Good food, poetry, and just a great party. Scots were well known for having received a good education, so when they travelled to foreign countries to seek their fortune and make their fortune, some like Dr. Gray of Elgin Hospital fame, Burns' suppers followed them. Army officers held India's first supper as early as 1812. Traders travelled about the same time to Canada and were addressing the haggis in colder January winds than they'd ever remembered back home. Merchants and ministers and maybe a few convicts carried Burns' works to Australia. With festivals in the 1820s, the first formal Burns supper in Oz, that's Australia, was held in 1844, while the poet's own nephew helped found the City and Burns Club of Dunedin, that's the Gaelic name for Edinburgh, in New Zealand. From the early publication of Raby's works in Philadelphia in the USA, America had warmed to his writings. The famous American president, Abraham Lincoln, kept a book of Burns by his bedside. Similarly, in the 20th century, Burns became immensely popular in China and in Russia, where they even placed his image on a postage stamp. He's actually also on one of our Scottish banknotes. Can you try and find out what was the value of that banknote? Maybe somebody's got one at home. Outside Scotland, there are more Burns suppers in Russia than any other country. In China, there's a dish called gung haggis fat choy. Now there's something of a Chinese supper to order from one of your nearest Chinese restaurants. Here in 2021 at Hopeman, East End, New Elgin, and maybe in some other Myory primaries, you are going to keep this memory very much alive still. It's a unique memory. No other poet is celebrated across the world on his birthday, and it is spontaneous. There's no central body that writes the rules or organises the speakers. We sort that out for ourselves. The Burns supper is enjoyed by everyone. So, however you celebrate Burns, whether you hold a grand banquet or even just have a few members of your family round the kitchen table and you hear the words, "Therefore, your honest sonsy face, great chieftain o' the pun race," or the song, "My love is like a red, red rose," or maybe that poem about the musie. And when you join hands in Auld Lang Syne, you'll have a real Burns supper. So, munch your haggis, enjoy his poems and songs, and of course, raise a generous toast of iron brew to his genius. You're sharing in a gift that Scotland has given the whole world, which started simply with 9 men in a cottage in Ayrshire. Thank you. Goodbye. Maybe I'll see you later. Bye for now.